Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show, all about movies.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is writer-director Jesse Noah Klein, and we're going to be discussing his brand new film, Like a House on Fire. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. This is a real fascinating film. There's a lot of layers to it, and I always like movies with a lot of layers to it. So our guests know a little bit about the film. Why don't you give us the synopsis of A House Like on Fire?
Sure, yeah. So the film centers around a character named Dara, and Dara comes back after a 2-year absence to reconnect with her family. And she discovers that her husband is with a woman who is now 7 months pregnant, and her 4-year-old daughter does not remember her. So it is about how she tries to reintegrate into this family that's left her behind.
Very fascinating topic. So interesting because what I liked about it, well, first of all, you don't have many stories about mothers leaving their children. And so it was kind of interesting that she made that choice to leave her child at a very young age, actually. So talk me a little bit about why you chose to have the protagonist be a woman and exactly that kind of situation, leaving her child at a young age.
Sure. Well, I came to the story in a number of different ways. The first being that I myself, moved away from home, as most people do. And so I was living in the U.S. for 6 years. And as I started to develop this project, this is one of the things that kind of drew me back to Canada and to Montreal specifically. And so definitely, this theme of coming home was never far away. And, is definitely, of course, at the center of this narrative. And the other way is, just the way that this project began, what has always been it's beating hard and its center was the protagonist, Dara. And so, the story really began with the character and came out from there and developed through what I believed she would be going through, if she were to come home. So, that was really, it was more the story came from the character rather than vice versa. And, to your point, it definitely was on my mind as I was thinking about it and as I was writing it, that this isn't a story that we see very often. And, I think it's one that, obviously, hopefully, really deserves our time. And, that's where I began.
Well, it does. And again, I don't think I think what we're seeing more and more, that it's not a unique situation as much. I mean, we used to be, God forbid that the mother left their children, but it's becoming more prevalent today as fathers, I guess, get more involved in the caretaking of the children and why the mothers decide to let the father raise the children, is unique to everyone, I suppose, every situation. But this certainly is unique. So the title of the film. Tell me a little bit about the title of the film. How did that come about, and what's the significance of that of the title?
Sure. I didn't have it right away. It definitely kind of came about as I was writing the screenplay, as I moved from draft to draft. And it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the expression. So for two people to get along like a house on fire. So it felt like that was kind of where I began with my attraction to the title. But of course, there's this underlying irony, which is that these people, there's a lot of different characters in the film, and all of these people have somewhat strained relationships with one another. So they're not exactly getting along like a house on fire. And then furthermore, just no matter what shape it's in, be it the family or the home, that's where that's where families are made, in a home. And so, I kind of wanted to just turn that idea on its head by having all those emotions all wrapped up in the title.
Oh, excellent. I really like the title, but I was curious as to why you chose that as your title. So this is your second feature, so that you've directed. How long did it take you to write this and then get it produced?
We were working on it. It's funny, like there's no you never know how long it's going to take to get a movie made.
Right.
And just because you make one quickly at one point doesn't mean the next one's going to be fast afterwards. There's just so many factors, and there's a lot of luck involved, and if the wind kind of blowing in the right direction. So for this one, it actually didn't take a hugely long time. It was, if I think of when I started writing it, probably in 2015, and we shot the film in the summer of 2019. So considering it can often take well over 5 years to get a movie made, that's why it didn't feel like it took an exorbitant amount of time. But that said, there was years of writing, years of collaboration with the producers on the screenplay to get it to where it needed to be. And then, then you start going out to cast and getting everything together. So it was, I'd say I started writing it in 2015, and now the movie comes out in 2021.
So you did this pre-pandemic, obviously, so that's great that you were able to do that before we all went into lockdown. Tell me about the casting. Yeah. Sarah Sutherland plays the main character of Dara, and her husband is Jared Abramson. Talk a little bit about how you cast both of these actors in the roles, and what that process was like.
I think they were actually kind of a bit similar in a way, because I think for both actors that they were looking for a role that was somewhat of a departure from what they had done just before. And for Sarah, she'd been on Veep for 7 years, and I personally love the show. I think it's brilliant, but and I think she had a great experience on it. I think that goes without saying almost. But I from what I understand, from what she's told me, she definitely, this was a very different opportunity where she could kind of stretch herself in a different way. And so I think that's what appealed to her about it. And, from what Jared told me, it's kind of similar. He was on a show, I think it's called Travelers on Netflix. And so for both of them, I think they wanted to do something a little bit more character driven, a little bit, with a bit more emotional range or intensity. And it was wonderful working with both of them. And with Sarah, it really, or with both even, it was really kind of more the discussion leading up to the shoot, more so than rehearsal per se. But there was a lot of prep. There was a lot of talking, and Sarah and I collaborating for months before really trying to nail the backstory. Because, there's, obviously the premise is that she's been gone, Dara's been gone for 2 years. And it was really important for both of us to know exactly what happened in those 2 years. Not just why you leave, but literally, like, after 2 months, after 9 months, after 17 months, what that meant. So by the time we really came to set, we had a very clear sense of who these characters were and where they were coming from. So there's definitely a lot of prep just building the backstory with both those actors.
And that's what's so interesting too about this, because there is that mystery, because you don't really know what happened. You don't really, and I kind of like that, because you leave it up to the viewer's imagination to kind of fill in the blanks to figure out why she made that decision to leave. Where did she really go? I mean, you allude to it in some way, but why? I have my own theory is that she had postpartum depression, and that's why she left. But that's my theory. But there could be many others, and certainly, which I really liked how you waited until, midway through, a little bit later, than you introduced the character of her mother. And I thought that was interesting. You want to talk a little bit about that relationship? And obviously that relationship affected her and her relationship with her daughter. It trickled down. But do you want to talk a little bit about that? And what's the name of the actress that played her mother? Because she's very familiar. And
Sheila McCarthy.
Okay. Yeah. I've seen her in a number of things, and she's always good.
Yeah. And to your point, definitely postpartum depression is something that, Dara experiences. And you're right. It's not something that's said explicitly in the film. But to your point about the mother, to me, all these things are absolutely intertwined and connected. And the way in which her past and traumas from her past come to define her present all are wrapped up with what illness she suffers from, her anxiety, her depression. And so the mother is, right smack dab in the middle. The ghost of this character kind of looms over the narrative, even though we only see her when, the film is virtually over. So, it was really important to kind of just plant these breadcrumbs through the story about how the mother has defined Dara in her absence. And ultimately, how the character over the course of the story learns to reckon with that, and ultimately how she tries to overcome it. So, no, you're absolutely, the mother is absolutely at the center of the story, even though she, as I said, really only appears at the very end.
Right. And just sort of even introduced as, that she's still alive, that we didn't even know that. So that's, also fascinating. Mm-hmm. And also, let's talk about her relationship with her father, because that's also a very interesting, I love the act. Again, what's the name of the actor who played her father?
His name is Michael Riley. Michael
Riley. He also is wonderful. I've seen him in other things too. And so let's talk a bit about their relationship.
Yeah, what's at the center of their relationship is a lack of communication. And, they, through Dara's younger years, as a single parent, all they really had for many years was each other. And so they were very close, yet there was much that went unspoken. What kind of defines their relationship is that this whole subject of the mother, whose name is Catherine in the story, is that it's taboo, is that they don't talk about what they really need to talk about in order to kind of face the demons and move forward, which again, I think we all can relate to, that it's not always easy to talk about things that are, that are dear to us or that we're sensitive to or that, have scarred us in some way. And so that's really at the heart of Dara's relationship with her father is, though he has the best of intentions and though he loves her dearly and, would move mountains for her, like all of us, there's certain things he can't do. And one of the things he can't do is talk about, his ex-wife. He left them. And so that's really what kind of evolves over the course of the story is how are they able to communicate with each other or even are they at all? And how does it evolve? And, hopefully at the end of the story, they do reach some kind of higher plane, Dara and her father. And that's, that's what they're both striving for.
Yeah, really interesting. In the film, obviously, the husband's moved on, her husband. And did the father also move on too? The relationship that he has, did that come about after she had left, or had that been already going on prior to her leaving? I wasn't quite clear about that.
That has been already going on, definitely prior to 2 years before.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an older relationship.
Okay. All right. And then it did disturb me that her husband moved on so quickly. So let's talk about that, because she's only been gone for 2 years and he's still married. And yet he, has this new relationship and this woman is 7 months pregnant. And I'm sure that had to be a huge shock for Dara when she returned, obviously. So talk a bit about that. Why did you choose that kind of scenario for these characters?
Yeah, all of these myriad factors, there's a lot of balls that are being juggled in the air in this story. And to me, it's like they all have to be just so. Otherwise, the whole thing kind of, falls apart. And I guess, I think that the reasons why, we absolutely can question where Danny's coming from in his decision-making. But what I try to make clear in the story is that Dara leaves without essentially a trace. They know that she's alive, but they don't really know that much more than that. And, most importantly, perhaps, Danny doesn't know not only when, but if Dara's ever going to return. That's because you're absolutely right. Like if she said, I'm checking into a facility, I'll be back in 6 months. Well, it's completely unforgivable behavior, and we would not be able to sympathize with him whatsoever. But because the way that the film is structured is that, Dara didn't know, and so she couldn't tell anyone else if and when she would be home. And so she went away for those 2 years to do the work, to be able to come back and be in that family, but without being able to tell, her father too, but especially Danny, her husband, without being able to tell him anything, how she's doing, when she'll be back, what the expectations can be. He falls into this other relationship, and, as the pregnancy wears on, they become much closer and they become committed, and, and then Dara reappears. So it's a perfect storm of a kind, but I think, forget about why it fits into the narrative as a plot device. I guess for me, one of the most important things that I was exploring in the film is I really wanted to respect each character's subjectivity. And for example, Therese, sometimes when people watch the film, they like the fact that, she's not the new girl who's, skeptical of Dara. She's empathic and she's in a bind too. She's pregnant. She wants to stay with this man. And so it was really important to me to respect each character. And that includes Danny. And so in respecting him, the only way that made sense was if we never, no one in the story, including Dara for that matter, knew if and when she was coming back. And that's kind of the world that I dropped the audience into at the beginning.
Yeah, I do like how you wrote Teresa's character, because she's empathetic. She's, there's no anger, there's not jealousy, and that could have fallen into the stereotypical roles because that's what we've seen. And yet there was this
exactly.
empathy. And obviously you still see the love between Dara and Danny in this film when she comes back. And, of course, she wants to restart everything up again, but that's going to be impossible because I don't know if he could trust her again. But also he's fallen in love with someone else and he's having another child with someone else. So I liked the way that this didn't get into melodrama. The film didn't fall into that, which so easily could have become very cliche and melodramatic, but it didn't. And I think that's a big credit to you as the writer and obviously the director too. Let's talk a little bit about the young actress who plays her daughter, because she was amazing.
Sure. Yeah, her name's Margot Vaillancourt. Of course, we're up here in Montreal, so half the people on the movie are French and the other half are English. Again, having to do with kind of the story, the whole thing is centered around that Dara's daughter doesn't remember her. And so if I would have cast a child who looks a bit older than that, I just didn't think you'd believe it. And so, we spent a good deal of time casting, and I looked at kids, let's say from up till the age of almost 8. And then again, it's just a different movie if, and a very different story and a different script if your child's a bit older. And so, we saw a number of different kids, and, it was just one of those things where Margot came in, and she was actually 4 years old at the time when we shot the movie, and much older kids would have trouble. It was a scene in the middle of the film where, she's visualizing and she's talking about wanting chocolate milk. And the 4-year-old girl, Margot, comes in and just knocks the scene out of the park, which was, quite a relief. But, kidding aside, it's very challenging working with an actress or an actor who's that young. Really the way that, when she's such a big role in the film, and certainly the other actors were great about this, we all had to be, we kind of had to manage our own role around what we needed to get from her. But, the thing that's so amazing with a child that's so young is there's just no pretense. There's no bag of tricks. She's just natural 100% of the time. And it was, a marvel at times, and it was really great working with her. Well,
you definitely feel it's very natural. You don't feel like she's acting, obviously, at all. And she's absolutely wonderful. She's going to have a big career if she decides to stay in the industry.
I know it's funny to talk about careers when people are 5 years old.
Right.
Yeah. I think she works a lot.
That's well, you can see why. There's probably not that many child actors, maybe, up where you are. Are there a lot of child actors? Did you go through a lot during the audition process?
Well, my guess is, like anything else, the cream rises to the top. We certainly saw a lot, and I think, there's, I'm sure not as much as in California or something like that, but there's a whole industry, and especially on the French side. This is the second largest French city in the world. So there's a huge industry here on the French side. On the English side, in Quebec, it's not huge, and it's certainly much, much, much larger in Toronto and in Ontario. But on the French side here, it's a booming, vigorous industry.
Yes, that's great to hear. I know Toronto is, and Vancouver, but I wasn't as sure as whether Montreal was too. Where did you film this? Did you film it in Montreal?
We actually filmed it in Northern Ontario. The way that movies get put together, there's myriad factors that that's changed the course of a production. And yeah, for a number of different reasons, we shot the film in North Bay, Ontario, as I said, the summer of 2019.
Very, very good. Lucky that you did that when you did. Who is, are you working on something new now, Jesse?
Yeah, sure. I'm developing a new script. And it's funny, I was mentioning Ghosts before. This is my first foray into more genre territory. And, you know, I still what makes me want to make films is characters and, you know, it's the moral quandaries that people battle with. But that having been said, I want to take all that I've done in my films thus far up until now, and I want to infuse that into something which is a little more genre territory, a little bit more atmospheric. And so my next film centers around a ghost story.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Now, it's not, is it going to be a horror flick or just more of a supernatural film?
You know, I guess I would say somewhere in between the two. You know, as I'll kind of say again that it's still going to very much be like a film of mine. So it's not like a straight horror or a straight psychological thriller, but I'm definitely kind of moving more in that direction and playing with those elements. But it's about an accidental death and a haunting.
Okay. All right. Interesting. I know I get so many, there's so many horror films that are coming out. There just seems to be a glut. And I know that seems to be the genre that everybody's leaning towards nowadays is horror and supernatural. I guess there's obviously a lot of interest in that via, you know, so many of the television shows that are out there and the shows that are on, you know, the streaming services too. So people are gravitating to that. As a director, who inspires you? What director do you admire, and whose work and how does that affect you as a director?
You know, the industry changes so rapidly, and I mean, I'm up in Canada, and that's, you know, an industry unto itself, which is different than the American film industry. But, you know, even it's very different from 2 years ago. The pandemic has irrevocably changed the film industry, let alone 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So I find it a bit of a tricky question to answer. So I guess what I would say is, you know, up until now, I've made films that are very family-centered. And so one filmmaker that, you know, I admire a lot is a French filmmaker from a number of decades ago named Maurice Pialat. He has a number of movies I really love. L'Enfance Nue is one. But one of my favorite films, and certainly my favorite of his, is called Un Nos Amours. And it came out in, I believe, the early 1980s. So he would be one, there's a real intensity of emotion in his films that I find is quite unique, actually, and really powerful. So he would be one that springs to mind, for sure. Again, yeah, I mean, to your point before, you know, my interest in genre kind of comes out of more the story than any kind of trends that are going on right now. And what I mean by that is, the genesis of the idea for my new film was always this accidental death and this haunting. So I'm not exactly sure where it will fit on kind of the spectrum of genre films right now, but yeah, certainly vis-a-vis what I've made up until now, which have been straight dramas, it's definitely more in genre territory.
Well, we will look forward to it when it comes out. Jesse, where can people find Like a House on Fire? Where can they watch this film?
Yeah, it's available now in the United States on iTunes, Amazon, and Vimeo. And it's also available in the UK, English-speaking countries, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, all iTunes, Amazon, and Vimeo. And then in Canada, it's available on iTunes and then some other streaming providers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jesse. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and I wish you much success with your film.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You can listen to The Jan Price Show whenever, wherever at thejampriceshow.com and on the iHeart Podcast Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, anywhere where you listen to your favorite podcast. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Jan Price Show. Thank you for listening.
Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show, all about movies.